So in all the discourse around Amazing Digital Circus, one of the biggest talking points I've seen among people is the ending, and specifically different ways that the ending failed and the things it didn't cover. This is an interesting one to me because one of the problems about being eternally trapped on the internet, the way my career has forced me to be, is you kind of see the same cycle of discourses happening over and over and over again. And in particular, how media ends. That's right. I'm talking about Amazing Digital Circus again because clearly I have very little else going on in my life. So I've seen this kind of conversation around the way media properties end with so many different things at this point. I saw it with Naruto, I saw it with Bleach, I saw it with Attack on Titan, and more recently I saw it with Jujutsu Kaisen. And I think what it's really kind of gave me the feeling of is that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it means to end a series and how people engage with it up to that point, which I kind of just wanted to talk about. See, I think what people don't get is that ending a series is really difficult for a lot of different reasons, and some that are just completely insane. So take, for example, like the very nature of any continuous piece of storytelling, whether it's like a chapter of manga or an episode of television, the whole purpose of that piece of like that one episode or that one chapter is to make it so that you want to consume the next chapter. That is how it works. That is the entire like aim of a story for 99.9% of its runtime. But then you get to the end of a series and all of a sudden you have to do the complete opposite of that. You have to slam the brakes on this momentum you have been building up for, you know, potentially years, decades even, and find a way to square everything else off in a way that is satisfying to the audience. And that is really, really difficult. But what's worse is that creators only really get a chance to do this very rarely. So take, for example, like say you have a 100-episode TV show. You are going to get really, really good at making episodes that lead into the next episode. But what you're going to be not good at is how to conclude that story, because you only get one chance to conclude this story, which you might have never done before. This might be your first ever time writing a TV show, and I would liken that to landing a plane without ever having had any training on how to land a plane before. Because recreational writing doesn't really work like that. Sure, someone might have like a hobby story or a piece of fan fiction they've been working on forever, but the likelihood that that's going to have all the moving parts and all the intricacies of an actual published piece of work going out to hundreds of thousands of millions of people, that's... no one ever has that experience in like a kind of hobby way necessarily. And so then a lot of these creators come to the end of a show and it's like, fuck, how do you even do this? And so I'm going to be careful here because I want to talk about a couple of different endings and how they handle it and how I feel about them. And I'm not going to go into actual spoilers. I'm going to talk about this stuff in like a super vague, super non-spoilery way. But two of the most interesting endings to me, especially when you compare them, is the ending of Sopranos and the ending of Breaking Bad. And again, without saying anything specific about the ending of Sopranos or Breaking Bad, if you look at Breaking Bad specifically, I would say the end of that show is something that you could reasonably come to the conclusion is going to happen from the very beginning of that show. I feel like from episode 1, it sets this really like distinct story like, hey, here is this dude, here is his situation, here is a decision that he has made that will have ramifications for the next 5 or so seasons of television, and you can kind of draw a logical line from that one like starting episode, from his motivation right to the end. And I don't think it's a bad ending necessarily, but what I will say is that I think in a lot of ways, the ending to Breaking Bad is the ending a lot of people wanted to Breaking Bad. It's a very kind of predictable and, dare I say, kind of safe ending. But in that, I also never really see people getting angry at it. I don't see anyone like being disappointed or frustrated or just not able to kind of parse what's happening. Like, it's a very simple, very one-to-one. You would have trouble misinterpreting what just happened. But then you take the episode of Sopranos, and Sopranos, like, God, I get fucked up when I watch like the early episodes of Sopranos now and see that it's like 4:3 television, because it is just that old now. But Sopranos was like the premier prestige television. It's when television started to really like dominate like the mainstream idea of entertainment and what it can be. And what's interesting about The Sopranos, well, there's a lot of interesting things about The Sopranos. You should really just watch Sopranos. There's an episode with a ghost cat and an episode where two mafia people get stuck in the forest, and it's somehow like just the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen. And yeah, I deeply love The Sopranos. I've watched it, like, no joke, I've watched it through 7 times, and every time it gets better. It's a comedy show. It's funny. I'm getting off track. It's not meant to be a comedy, but it's just a great show. But the ending of Sopranos is this super weird ending. When it ends, I think the initial reaction to a lot of people was just like stunned. Like, and when I say stunned, I don't necessarily mean in a positive way. I mean in a, wait, what the fuck was that kind of way? Did they make a mistake? Did something happen? Did someone like drop a reel in the editing room and just never put it back? And it's like this very strange, very divisive ending. And in the years since, the guy who created The Sopranos has come out and like given his take on what it was. And here's the thing I'd say, right? I didn't have a problem when I first watched the ending of Sopranos, and I watched it like on television where it was coming out, because lest I remind all of you, I am pushing 40. Okay, I am right up against 40, and I'm gonna keep going. And I didn't necessarily have the frustration of it, but what I would say is that the internet was not around the way it is today. And I'd say if a TV show ended the way Sopranos ended, there would be a fucking holy war online about whether it was a good ending, a bad ending, or whatever. But regardless, here's what I always say. With Breaking Bad, I never think about Breaking Bad's ending. I just never ever think about it, except in moments like this where I'm consciously talking about it, because it's a simple kind of cut and dry ending. And again, not a bad thing. I always think about Sopranos ending. I always think about like the specific kind of feeling it left me with, and like what the author was trying to say with it. And it has just stuck with me for years and years and years. This completely like strange, weird, and interesting ending. And to me, I think I'm always going to be on the side where I would rather just try and see what the author is trying to say, as opposed to be able to like digest an ending in a way that makes sense. I think this goes back to my like, I like to eat art conversation. You know, I like to feel what someone else is trying to communicate through art, as opposed to seeing art fulfill a criteria of what I think it should be. And I think it's here where you encounter another huge problem with ending shows, because when a show does end, what that kind of does is cuts off the infinite amount of permutations of what people thought that show was. Fans can have all their different fan theories about what's happening in a show, what the characters mean, who the characters are, who's good, who's bad, who's like, you know, in love, who's not in love. And once you end a show, you basically, like, the second last episode of a show is literally like it's like a conversation tree or a skill tree from a video game, and you have it going into all these different like outcomes and specialities and like all these things it could do, could say, or could go. And then when you get to the last episode of a show, it just goes like this, and all of a sudden it is one decisive thing. Now there's way less room for fan theory, for fan speculation, for anything, because now the show has a cap on it. Now there is a tombstone, and this like ocean of possibilities gets nearly entirely cut off. And I think for a lot of people that can be like very upsetting, and especially when people see like themselves relating to a certain part of a show or seeing themselves in a certain character. And I feel like this is what happened with The Amazing Digital Circus. Spoilers for the end of The Amazing Digital Circus. So if you have seen it, you will know that basically it turns out that this character, Jax, is trans, but never committed to it, never actually engaged with this part of themselves, to the point that they've just kind of been this horrible, abusive asshole this entire show, and they never get their redemption. They never get their moment in the sun to really enjoy who they are. And it was interesting, I was on social media recently, and I saw a drawing Gooseworks did, and it was called Jax If They Weren't a Total Asshole, or Jax If She Wasn't a Total Asshole. and or a total piece of shit, and like it just shows her being happy, you know. And I think that was like not the post, but the fact that Jax doesn't have a good ending was difficult for a lot of people, because I think a lot of people saw maybe their own journey or their own struggles in that character, which I absolutely sympathize with. And, you know, it would have been nice to have a story where it's like this thing works out for this person, especially if people are really invested in like a kind of personal way. So like I absolutely get it. But at the same time, do you know what it made me think of? So very occasionally I'll be browsing like TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and I'll get these videos of these dudes, right? And like, this sounds comical in a way, but I actually do have a lot of sympathy for these guys, where they'll be like very, very Christian dudes, and they'll be talking about how they have homosexual urges, but with the Lord's strength, they can resist, you know? And I always see them, and it's like some of them are doing these big dramatic videos about how, like, you know, they want to be with a man so badly, but no, they're men of God, they're, you know, all this kind of stuff. And like, I always comment the same thing on those videos every time, and I just write, go be happy, mate. You know, because like, it's just, dude, it doesn't need to be like this. You can be happy. What you want can be right there. And it's just so sad that they've grown up in this way that they feel like they can't accept that parts of themselves. And it always just makes me like, oh, fuck, man, just go do it. Just go hang out with a bunch of other gay dudes. You will be better off, you know? And so to me, when I saw the end of The Amazing Digital Circus, like, that's what it made me think of. It made me think of, just go be happy, mate. And specifically, I feel like it's this kind of cautionary tale about this person who couldn't do that. And I think there's a real message in that, and I think there's a real tragedy in that. And that is, I think, I've kind of rolled it around in my head a fair bit now, and that's why I think, like, I did actually like the ending. Now, I didn't think it was perfect. Again, I kind of talked before, I didn't really think the live action sections work, and I think they kind of muddy up what I just talked about a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of what it was for me. But yeah, again, with this stuff, and like, I always have to fucking give this goddamn preface or postface on media. That's just what I thought about it. It's not really like me saying everyone else should see it that way, because I don't know why people feel a need to like imprint their opinion on other people. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's fine. But yeah, look, that's the video. And if you want, you can go buy some t-shirts over at eyepatchwolves.com. Realized I haven't said this for a while. There's lots of nice t-shirts, some of which will be on screen right now. Okay, I love you. Goodbye.